Monopoly is often understood as harmful to the economy. However, in economics, a natural monopoly can be cost efficient.
This happens because the firm's average cost keep falling as output increases. In such industries, having one large producer is actually more efficient than having many small ones. This is why in services like electricity, water, you will usually find regulated monopolies.
Let's now look at the key features of a natural monopoly. The first key feature is high fixed costs. A very large upfront investment is required to build infrastructure such as power lines, water pipes, or rail networks. Once this infrastructure is in place, the cost of serving additional consumers becomes much lower. These high fixed costs lead directly to the next key feature, economies of scale. As output increases, the firm's average cost falls because fixed costs are spread over more units. This is shown by the long run average cost curve. At a low level of output, average cost is high. As output increases, average cost continues to fall. Now, let me share a small tip here. In exam answers, you could write this as the LRAC continues to fall over the relevant range of output. Because average cost keeps falling, one large firm can produce at a lower cost than several smaller firms. I have also added a card here if you want a quick refresher on economies of scale. The link is also in the description. Another important feature of a natural monopoly is barriers to entry. As these industries involve very high fixed costs to enter the market, a new firm would need to make the same large upfront investment. Because this investment is so expensive and risky, most new firms are discouraged from entering. So the existing firm faces very little competition. Notice the cause and effect here. High fixed costs lead to barriers to entry, which protect this monopoly. Remember, the barrier here is the high initial cost, not simply low prices. Low prices are a result of efficiency, not the main reason that why firms stay out. Because infrastructure in natural monopolies is extremely expensive, having more than one firm would mean duplicating the same facilities. This duplication raises average costs and wastes resources. So, from an efficiency point of view, one firm supplying the entire market can actually be more cost efficient than competition. This you can use as an important evaluation point in your answers. This explains why a natural monopoly may be preferred despite the lack of competition. However, efficiency on its own is not enough. Because a natural monopoly faces little or no competition, there is a risk of high prices and misuse of monopoly power. That is why natural monopolies are usually regulated to control prices and output and as well as protect consumers. In your answers, this is how you balance the argument. Regulation helps improve allocative efficiency and protect consumers while still allowing the firm to benefit from economies of scale and remain productive. So, this brings together all the important features of a natural monopoly. Let's now see how all of this appears in a diagram starting with the cost curves. In a normal firm, the long run average cost curve is usually U shaped. But in the case of a natural monopoly, because fixed costs are very high, the firm needs to produce a very large output to keep average cost low. This means the minimum efficient scale is very large. So instead of becoming U shaped, the long run average cost remains downward sloping over the relevant range of market demand. This is why it is more efficient for one large firm to supply the whole market than for having many small firms to compete. Now let's look at the marginal cost curve. Marginal cost shows the extra cost of producing one more unit of output. Once the main infrastructure is in place, the cost of serving an additional consumer is relatively low. So marginal cost remains low. Because average cost is falling due to strong economies of scale, the marginal cost curve lies below the average cost over most of the relevant range. In theory, LRMC intersects LRAC at its minimum point. But in a natural monopoly, this minimum occurs at a very high level of output, often beyond market demand. So, in practice, we mainly observe the downward sloping part of both curves. This is why, in a natural monopoly, the cost curves are actually shown like this. Now that we understand the shape of the cost curves, let's bring everything together in the full natural monopoly diagram. On the vertical axis, we measure price, cost, and revenue. On the horizontal, we measure quantity of output. We begin with the cost curves. This curve shows the long run average cost or LRAC. Below it, we have the long run marginal cost curve or LRMC. Now let's add the revenue curves. This downward sloping curve is the average revenue curve, which also represents your market demand. Because this is a monopoly, the marginal revenue curve lies below the average revenue curve. A profit maximizing monopolist produces where your marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, this point. At this point, MR equals LRMC, giving an output level of Q1. To find the price, we move vertically up from Q1 to the average revenue curve, which gives us a price of P1. At the same output level, the average cost shown by the LRAC curve is C1. Because price is greater than average cost, the firm earns supernormal profit. However, this outcome is not socially optimal and is allocatively inefficient. The price is much higher and the quantity produced is lower than what is desirable from society's point of view. There is allocative inefficiency because price does not equal marginal cost. This is where governments may intervene in natural monopolies. They may set the price equal to marginal cost. This occurs at P2, where price equals LRMC. At this price, the quantity demanded will now increase to Q2. However, if we extend this output level up to the average cost curve, we see that average cost is higher than price. This means the firm would make actually a loss if it were forced to price at marginal cost. To keep the firm operating, what government can do is they may provide subsidies. They may be required to provide subsidies to this type of firms. Pricing at marginal cost achieves allocative efficiency because price reflects the cost of producing the last unit. However, it does not guarantee financial sustainability without subsidies to the firm. So, the key issue in a natural monopoly is balancing low prices for consumers while also keeping the firm financially viable. Let's finish with the key takeaway from this diagram. First, notice what happens under marginal cost pricing in a natural monopoly. When price is set equal to marginal cost, output increases, which is good for consumers. But at that level of output, average cost is still higher than marginal cost. This means the firm is charging a price that does not fully cover its costs. As a result, the natural monopoly would make a loss if it were forced to price at marginal cost. Now, this leads to a very common exam mistake. Students often show marginal cost pricing correctly, but forget to clearly show that AC lies above MC at that output. And without showing this gap, the reason for losses is not fully explained. The key insight, what you must remember in the case of a natural monopoly is subsidies allow the firm to keep operating while still charging a lower socially desirable price. Marginal cost pricing improves allocative efficiency, but in a natural monopoly, it may require government support to be financially sustainable. So these are the key points you must always keep in mind while explaining the diagram. Now let's quickly summarize. A natural monopoly exists because one firm can supply the whole market at a lower cost as average costs keep falling with higher output. If more firms entered, expensive infrastructure would be duplicated, increasing costs instead of reducing them. So, competition in this case would make production less efficient. This is why natural monopolies are usually regulated to control prices and protect consumers. In your answers, remember this key point. High fixed costs and economies of scale allow one firm to supply the market more cheaply than many firms. This is what makes a natural monopoly efficient, but it is always in need of careful regulation. Now you are clear on the costs, the diagram, and the regulation, exactly what examiners look for. In the next video, we will practice real exam questions together. So make sure you watch that next. If you would like personal guidance for your economics exams, you can DM me on Instagram or visit my website. I will put all the details in the description below. See you soon.